The late 1990s were supposed to be a time of pure magic for Keanu Reeves. If you looked at him from the outside, from the perspective of a fan sitting in a movie theater or watching him on a talk show, he seemed to be holding the entire world in his hands. He was about to become the star of The Matrix, a movie that would change cinema forever. He was famous, he was wealthy, and he was loved by millions. But life has a strange way of balancing things out. Just when the universe gives you everything you want, it can sometimes take away the things you actually need. During this time, Keanu was not just a movie star. He was a man in love. He was in a relationship with Jennifer Syme, a woman who understood him in a way that few others did. They were a quiet couple, not interested in the flashy side of Hollywood. They just wanted to build a life together. Their biggest dream was about to come true. They were expecting a baby. For Keanu, this was the most important role of his life. He wasn't going to be Neo or an action hero anymore. He was going to be a father. He spent his days on set filming high-octane scenes, fighting bad guys, and dodging bullets. But in his off hours, his mind was completely focused on the nursery. He talked about the baby constantly. He was ready to settle down. He was ready to be a dad. You could see the change in him. People around him noticed that he seemed lighter, happier. He carried a certain peace with him. He would look at baby clothes with the same excitement that a child looks at candy. The future looked bright. It was perfect. But then, without any warning, the dream turned into a nightmare. This is where the cruel nature of life really shows its face. It doesn't knock on the door and ask for permission. It just barges in. The tragedy struck near the end of the pregnancy. It was a sudden, devastating blow. The baby, a girl, was stillborn. In a single moment, all the joy, all the planning, and all the hope for the future evaporated into thin air. Imagine the silence in that room. The world outside was still going on, people were laughing, traffic was moving, movies were playing, but inside that hospital, time stopped completely. The happiness that Keanu had felt was replaced by a heavy, suffocating darkness. It wasn't just sadness. It was a physical pain that felt like a weight sitting on his chest. The cruel decision here wasn't something Keanu chose. It was the cruel decision of fate to take away a life before it had even begun. The days that followed were a blur for him. He had to go back to work. He had to promote The Matrix. He had to smile for cameras and answer questions about a fictional world while his real life was falling apart. This is the part of the story that makes you realize just how strong human beings can be, but also how heartbreaking it is to watch someone suffer in silence. Think about what it takes to stand on a red carpet, with flashing lights blinding you, and pretend that everything is okay when your heart has just been shattered. He did it because he had to. He did it because that is who he is, a professional who doesn't want to burden others with his pain, but the pain was there, eating away at him. And he wasn't the only one suffering. Jennifer was broken too. They were two people who loved each other deeply, but they were drowning in an ocean of grief. Grief is a very strange and powerful thing. It doesn't always bring people together. Sometimes it pushes them apart because looking at the other person just reminds you of what you lost. Every time they looked at each other, they saw the ghost of the baby they didn't get to hold. The house felt too big and too quiet. The future they had planned was gone, replaced by a big, scary question mark. The relationship began to strain under the weight of this tragedy. It wasn't that they stopped loving each other. It was just too painful to be together. They were reminders to one another of the worst thing that had ever happened to them. It is a cruel twist of fate that when you need comfort the most, sometimes the person you love is the one you can't be around. They tried to make it work. They tried to support each other, but the sadness was a wall that they couldn't climb over. Eventually, they came to a heartbreaking realization. They had to make a decision. They decided to separate. It was a gentle decision made out of love rather than anger. They both knew that they couldn't heal while they were constantly surrounded by the reminders of their loss. It was the cruel decision of the second part of this tragedy. First, they lost the baby. Then they lost each other. It felt like the world was telling Keanu that he wasn't allowed to be happy. It felt like a test that he didn't ask for and wasn't sure how to pass. After the separation, Keanu retreated into himself even more. He was surrounded by people every day, co-stars, crew members, fans, but he was incredibly lonely. He would often be seen sitting alone in parks or walking the streets of New York late at night, just trying to find a moment of peace. He stopped caring about the fame. The money didn't matter. The success of The Matrix felt hollow. He traded his suits for simple clothes. He stopped wearing fancy watches. He just wanted to disappear into the background. People often wonder how he survived this period. How do you keep going when you lose the two things that matter most to you in such a short amount of time? The answer lies in his character. He didn't blame the world. He didn't become bitter or angry at God. He just accepted the pain as a part of his life. He took the grief and he carried it like a heavy stone in his pocket. He didn't throw it at anyone. He didn't complain about it. He just carried it. This part of his life is so important to understand because it sets the stage for what happens next. It explains why he acts the way he does now. It explains why he is so private, why he is so kind to strangers, and why he doesn't take anything for granted. The man who was walking those streets in the late 90s was a man who had seen the worst side of life. He had looked into the abyss, and the abyss had looked back at him. But he didn't let it consume him completely. There is a famous saying that says, "The hottest fires forge the hardest steel." Keanu was being forged in that fire. The cruelty of the decisions made by fate, the loss of his child, the end of his relationship were breaking him down, but they were also rebuilding him. They were stripping away the actor and leaving just the human being. A human being who knew exactly how much it hurt to lose something. And maybe, just maybe, that pain was preparing him for something else. It was preparing him to be a witness to other people's pain. He didn't know it yet. But his reaction to all this sadness would eventually define who he is more than any movie role ever could. The world thought they knew Keanu Reeves. They thought he was the cool guy on the screen. But the real story was happening in the quiet moments. The real story was about a man learning to walk again after his legs had been knocked out from under him. He was learning to breathe again after the wind had been knocked out of him, and as he walked through those lonely streets, dealing with the cruel hand he had been dealt, he had no idea that he was being watched. He had no idea that his private struggle was about to intersect with a stranger in a way that would shock everyone. He was just a man trying to survive the day, hoping that tomorrow would hurt a little less than today. This was the lowest point, the darkness before the dawn. But sometimes it is in the darkest moments that the true light of a person's soul shines the brightest. And for Keanu, the brightest light was still waiting to be seen. New York City is a place that never really stops. The noise is constant. You have the honking of yellow taxis, the scream of sirens from police cars rushing to who knows where, and the endless chatter of millions of people walking on the sidewalks. It is a city made of concrete and steel, where people are often in too much of a hurry to look up at the sky or even look each other in the eye. But hidden inside this loud, chaotic maze, there are quiet places, small parks where the trees grow tall enough to block out the skyscrapers, and for a few minutes you can pretend you are somewhere else. It is in one of these quiet corners that our story takes a turn. It is here that we meet the second main character of this story, a man who doesn't have a name in this tale, but who plays a very important role. We will call him the witness. The witness wasn't a fan. He wasn't someone waiting for an autograph or hoping to catch a glimpse of a movie star just to say hello. He was a man with a camera, a long lens, and a very specific job. He made his living by selling images, not images of beauty, but images of weakness. He was part of the world that feeds on the misery of others. His job was to camp out, wait, and watch. He was looking for the perfect shot. Not a shot of Keanu Reeves smiling or waving at the crowd. Those pictures didn't sell. People didn't want to see happy celebrities. They wanted to see the cracks in the armor. They wanted to see them looking tired, angry, or upset. The witness knew this. He had a cynical heart. He had seen too many movie stars act like divas or treat people badly. To him, celebrities were just products. They were rich people who complained about their lives while regular folks struggled to pay rent. He didn't feel bad about what he did. He told himself it was just business. On this particular day, the air was crisp and cold. The sky was a pale gray, the kind of color that makes you want to stay inside with a hot cup of coffee. But the witness was outside, pacing slowly near a small bench in a secluded area of the park. He had heard rumors. The word on the street was that Keanu Reeves was falling apart. People were saying he was depressed, that he was wandering the streets like a ghost. The media was hungry for a story. They wanted a picture that proved it. They wanted the "I told you so" moment. The witness was determined to be the one to get it. He found a hiding spot behind some thick bush and a large stone statue. He adjusted his jacket to keep out the chill and checked his camera. The lens was heavy, a black eye that could see things from far away. He waited. Time moved slowly. A jogger went by wearing headphones, lost in their own world. An old woman fed pigeons, scattering crumbs on the cold ground. The watcher checked his watch. He was getting impatient. His fingers were getting numb. But then he saw him. Keanu Reeves walked into the small clearing. And for a second, the witness almost didn't recognize him. He wasn't wearing a flashy outfit. No leather jacket, no designer sunglasses, no entourage of bodyguards surrounding him. He was wearing a simple, worn-out hoodie and a pair of jeans that looked like they had seen better days. His hair was messy, not styled for a movie premiere, but just messy from the wind. He looked incredibly small compared to the giant trees surrounding him. He didn't walk like a movie star. He walked like a man carrying a heavy suitcase up a long flight of stairs. The witness lifted his camera, looking through the viewfinder. The lens zoomed in, bringing Keanu's face into sharp focus. This was the moment he was waiting for. He expected to see anger. He expected to see Keanu maybe kicking a stone or looking around nervously, maybe even talking to himself. That would be the headline. Keanu unhinged. That was worth money. But the image on the other side of the lens was something completely different. It made the witness pause, his finger hovering over the shutter button. Keanu sat down on the wooden bench. He didn't pace. He didn't check his phone. He just sat. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and placed his head in his hands for a long moment. Then he sat up and reached into a brown paper bag he had been carrying. He pulled out a sandwich. It wasn't a fancy meal from a high-end restaurant. It was just a sandwich wrapped in plastic. He unwrapped it slowly, carefully, like it was the most important thing in the world at that moment. Through the camera, the witness studied Keanu's face. He expected tears or a look of frustration. Instead, he saw a profound sadness. It wasn't a loud sadness. It was a quiet, empty kind of sadness. It was the look of someone who has lost something so big that they don't know how to fill the hole left behind. Keanu took a bite of the sandwich and chewed slowly. He wasn't really tasting the food. He was just going through the motions. He looked out at the empty space in front of him, his eyes unfocused. As if he was seeing a memory playing out in the air, this confused the witness. He was used to people performing. He was used to celebrities who knew they were being watched and would act out to get attention. But Keanu was alone. He didn't know he was being watched. There was no show here. This was raw, unfiltered human pain. The witness lowered the camera slightly, just watching with his own eyes. He felt a strange tightness in his chest, a feeling he wasn't used to. He tried to brush it off. He reminded himself of the money. He reminded himself of the cruel headlines he could write. Hungry and homeless? Keanu eats alone in the park. It would be a hit, but he couldn't bring himself to press the button yet. There was a dignity in the way Keanu sat there. Even in his sadness, even in his shabby clothes, he had a quiet grace. He wasn't bothering anyone. He wasn't making a scene. He was just a man eating a sandwich, trying to survive the day. The witness looked at the other people in the park. No one else noticed him. A couple walked by holding hands, laughing at a joke, completely oblivious to the famous man sitting 5 feet away. It was ironic. Keanu was known by millions of people, recognized everywhere he went, yet in this moment, he was the most invisible person in the city. The minutes ticked by. Keanu finished about half the sandwich and then stopped. He wrapped the rest back up in the paper and put it gently back into the bag. He wasn't wasteful. He saved the rest for later. He took a deep breath, exhaling a cloud of white steam into the cold air. He looked up at the sky, watching a bird fly overhead. There was a longing in his eyes, a wish to just fly away, to leave all the pain on the ground and disappear into the clouds. The witness shifted his weight, his foot crunching on a dry leaf. It was a tiny sound, barely audible, but in the quiet of the park it sounded like a gunshot. Keanu's head snapped around. His eyes locked onto the bush where the witness was hiding. For a second, the witness panicked. He had been caught? He expected Keanu to jump up and run, or to shout, or to cover his face. He expected a fight, but Keanu didn't do any of those things. He just looked. He didn't look angry. He didn't look scared. He just looked tired. He stared at the bush with a look that said, "Really? This too?" It was a look of resignation. He had dealt with so much real pain in his life that the annoyance of a paparazzi hiding in the bush didn't even seem to register as a threat. It was just another annoyance in a long line of annoyances. The witness felt his face get hot. He felt ashamed. He was a grown man hiding in the bush, spying on another human being who was clearly hurting. He thought about his own life. He thought about the times he felt lonely or sad, and how he would feel if someone pointed a camera at him during those moments. The camera suddenly felt very heavy in his hands. It felt like a weapon, and he didn't want to be the one holding it anymore. He stood up slowly, stepping out from behind the bush. There was no point hiding now. The lens was exposed. The secret was out. He stood there, awkward and stiff, waiting for Keanu to say something. The distance between them was only a few yards, but it felt like a canyon. On one side, the man who sold pain for money. On the other, the man who was living through it with quiet dignity. Keanu didn't run. He didn't cover his face. He sat there on the bench, his brown paper bag next to him, looking at the intruder. He didn't say a word. He just waited. He was giving the witness a choice. He was waiting to see what kind of man this was going to be. Was he going to be a vulture, or was he going to be a human being? The witness took a deep breath. The cold air filled his lungs. He looked at the camera in his hand, then back at Keanu. He saw the cruel decision that life had made for Keanu written all over his face, the loss, the grief, the solitude. And he realized that capturing that moment and selling it to the highest bidder would be the cruel decision he would have to make. It would be a choice to hurt someone who was already down. It would be kicking a man when he was already on his knees. This was the turning point. The tension in the air was so thick you could almost touch it. The city noise faded away, and it was just the two of them. The witness realized he had become the villain in this story without even meaning to. He had a choice to make. He could take the photo, make a quick buck, and add to Keanu's burden. Or he could put the camera down, walk away, and let the man have his peace. It seems like an easy choice, but in a world driven by money and gossip, doing the right thing is often the hardest thing to do. Keanu still hadn't looked away. His eyes were dark and deep, holding a story that was too long to tell. The witness felt that gaze piercing right through him. It wasn't a judgmental look, but it was a powerful one. It was the look of a man who... The silence in the small patch of park was heavy, pressing down on the witness like a physical weight. For a few seconds, neither man moved. The witness stood there, his boots crunching softly on the dry leaves, while Keanu sat still on the bench, the half-eaten sandwich resting in his lap. The air between them was charged with tension. It was the classic standoff, the hunter and the prey. But in this moment, the witness didn't feel like a powerful hunter. He felt like an intruder who had walked into a sacred ceremony uninvited. He had expected to feel a rush of adrenaline, the thrill of the chase. Instead, he felt a cold knot of shame forming in his stomach. But the witness knew how to bury his feelings. He had been doing this job for too long. He knew how to turn off his conscience and turn on the aggression. He lifted the heavy camera to his eye. It was a shield. When he was looking through the lens, he didn't have to look at Keanu as a human being. He just saw a subject. He saw pixels and light and shadows. He saw a potential paycheck. The lens made a whirring sound as it zoomed in tight. capturing the details of Keanu's face, the tired eyes, the messy hair, the lines of worry that seemed etched into his skin. Click, click, click. The sound of the shutter was harsh and loud, shattering the quiet peace of the afternoon like glass breaking on a floor. It was an ugly noise, a mechanical invasion of a moment that was supposed to be private. Keanu didn't flinch at the noise, but his eyes narrowed slightly. He didn't cover his face. He didn't turn away. He just sat there, taking it. This lack of reaction only frustrated the witness. He wanted Keanu to run. He wanted him to get angry. A picture of Keanu Reeves looking sad was okay, but a picture of Keanu Reeves angry, shouting at a photographer to leave him alone, that was gold. That would sell for 10 times the price. The witness needed a reaction. He decided to push harder. He stepped closer, closing the distance between them until he was standing just a few feet away from the bench. He lowered the camera slightly, letting his face be seen. He wanted Keanu to know who was doing this. He wanted to be the villain in this story because in his world, the villain often wins. Rough day, huh? The witness said. His voice came out rougher than he intended, trying to sound tough. You look terrible, Keanu. What's the matter? The big movie star can't handle a little time alone? It was a cheap shot, a low blow designed to hurt? The witness waited for the explosion. He waited for Keanu to jump up and tell him to get lost. But Keanu just looked at him. There was no anger in his eyes. There was just a deep, profound sadness that seemed to look right through the witness's tough exterior. It was a look that said, asterisk, I know you are doing this for money, and I feel sorry for you, asterisk. That look unsettled the witness more than any shout could have. He felt exposed. He felt like the one being judged. To cover up his discomfort, he became more aggressive. He raised the camera again, the shutter clicking rapidly like a machine gun. Click, 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 click. Come on, give me a reaction. The witness shouted, his voice echoing in the quiet park. Why are you sitting here all alone? Are you thinking about her? Are you thinking about the baby? Give the people what they want. He was crossing a line now. He was bringing up the tragedy, using Keanu's dead child and his lost love as weapons to provoke him. It was a cruel thing to do, perhaps the cruelest thing a person could do to a stranger. The witness knew it was wrong. He knew that if anyone saw him doing this, they would hate him. But the hunger for the perfect shot, the desire to capture a moment of raw emotional breakdown, consumed him. He had become a monster and he didn't know how to stop. Keanu finally moved. He slowly placed the sandwich back into the brown paper bag. He folded the top of the bag over, smoothing it down with his hands. The movements were slow and deliberate. He wasn't rushing. He was treating the simple sandwich with respect, even in the middle of this harassment. Then he turned his full body toward the witness. The witness felt his heart skip a beat. He had finally gotten to him. He braced himself, expecting Keanu to lunge or to shout or to knock the camera out of his hands. The lens was still focused on Keanu's face, recording every micro-expression. The witness's finger was poised over the shutter, ready to capture the exact moment of the explosion, but the explosion never came. Keanu stood up. He wasn't a tall man, but in that moment he seemed to tower over the situation. He looked the witness directly in the eye. There was a pause, a single heartbeat of time where the noise of the city seemed to fade away completely. The birds stopped chirping. The distant traffic noise vanished. It was just the two of them. Keanu's face wasn't twisted in rage. It was calm. Terrifyingly calm. The witness saw something in those dark eyes that stopped him cold. He saw a man who had survived the worst kind of pain a human being can experience. He saw a man who had lost his heart and was still walking around. Compared to that, what was a photographer with a camera? What was a few insults? The witness realized with a jolt that his little game wasn't working. You cannot hurt a man who has already felt the ultimate pain. You cannot scare a ghost who has already walked through hell. Why are you doing this? Keanu asked. His voice was soft, barely above a whisper. But it carried a strength that the witness's shouting lacked. It wasn't a question of curiosity. It was a question of sorrow. He sounded genuinely confused, not for himself but for the witness. He sounded like he was asking asterisk, why is this your life? Why is this what you choose to do? Asterisk, the witness opened his mouth to speak, to come up with a snappy comeback, but no words came out. He stood there, his mouth hanging open, looking foolish. The camera in his hand suddenly felt incredibly heavy, like a brick. The lens, which had been his weapon of choice, now felt like an accusing eye. Staring back at him, he realized then that he had lost. He had come here to break Keanu Reeves, to expose his weakness. But instead, Keanu's quiet dignity had exposed the witness's weakness. The witness was the one who was small. He was the one who was petty. He was the one who was hiding behind a camera, trying to make a living off other people's pain. The tension in the air shifted. It was no longer a confrontation between a predator and prey. It was a moment of truth. The witness had a choice. He could keep pushing, keep shouting, keep trying to force a reaction that wasn't going to come. Or he could stop. He could lower the camera. He could admit, if only to himself, that this was wrong. The wind picked up, rustling the bare branches of the trees above them. A few dry leaves swirled around their feet. Keanu waited. He didn't repeat the question. He didn't move to leave. He just stood there, his hands at his sides, his posture open and defenseless. He was giving the witness a chance to walk away from the edge. He was showing more kindness in that moment than most people would show to a stranger who was harassing them. The witness looked through the viewfinder one last time. He saw the image of Keanu Reeves. Kind, patient. He saw the headline potential fading away. Keanu Reeves argues with photographer. It seemed so silly now. It seemed so fake. The real story was happening right here, in the silence between them. The real story was about a man who refused to let the world make him hard. The witness lowered the camera. The shutter didn't click. The machine went silent. He took a step back, his breath coming out in shaky white puffs. He felt like he had just woken up from a bad dream. He looked at Keanu, really looked at him, not as a celebrity, but as a man. A man who had suffered a cruel decision by fate and was still standing. The witness didn't know what to say. There were no words for the apology he felt. He just stood there, feeling small and foolish. The park was quiet again. The moment of confrontation had passed, dissolved by Keanu's refusal to fight back. Now the only thing left was the reaction. The witness held his breath, waiting to see what Keanu would do next. Would he walk away? Would he finally get angry? What happened next was something the witness would never forget. It was a reaction so simple, so unexpected, that it would change the way he looked at the world forever. It was the moment the story turned from a tragedy into a lesson. The silence that stretched between the two men in the quiet park was deafening. It was heavier than the camera hanging around the witness's neck, and heavier than the grief that Keanu carried in his heart. The witness stood frozen, his hands trembling slightly at his sides. He had lowered his weapon, but he didn't know what to do with himself. He felt naked without the lens hiding his face. For years he had been the one in control, the one who decided how the story was told. He was the shadow that haunted people. But now, standing in the cold gray light of the afternoon, he felt like a small child who had been caught doing something wrong by a parent who wasn't angry. Just disappointed, he braced himself for the scream. He expected Keanu to finally snap, to yell, to tell him to get out of his face. In his line of work, people usually got angry. They cursed, they threw things, they tried to cover the lens. That was the script the witness knew how to follow. He knew how to handle anger. He knew how to make anger look like insanity. But Keanu wasn't giving him that script. Keanu was just standing there, his breathing slow and steady, his hands loose and open. There was no threat in his posture, only a calmness that was completely unnerving. The witness watched Keanu's face closely, looking for a twitch, a sign of the rage that must be boiling underneath. But he didn't see rage. He saw a man who was looking right through the camera, right through the job, right through the bitterness, and seeing the human being standing there. It was a gaze that felt like it was stripping away layers of armor. The witness suddenly felt very aware of his own appearance, his wrinkled jacket, his unshaven face, the cheap boots he wore. He felt the weight of his own life, the struggles he had, the reasons he took this awful job in the first place. He realized that in a way, they were both just trying to survive. Keanu took a small step forward. The witness instinctively stepped back, raising his hands slightly in a defensive gesture. It was a reflex. He was used to people recoiling from him or attacking him. But Keanu stopped. He didn't come any closer. He held his ground, respecting the invisible boundary between them. He looked at the camera hanging around the witness's neck. Then he looked back at the witness's eyes. "You must be tired," Keanu said softly. The words were so simple, so unexpected that they caught the witness completely off guard. He blinked, his mouth opening slightly. Tired? He wasn't the one who had lost his family. He wasn't the one who was famous and hounded day and night. He was just the guy with the camera. But then, as the words sank in, he realized that he was tired. He was tired of chasing people. He was tired of looking for flaws. He was tired of being angry at the world because it hadn't given him the life he wanted. He was exhausted. The witness didn't answer. He couldn't find his voice. He just nodded once, a jerky, awkward movement. "It's a hard way to live," Keanu continued, his voice gentle, not accusing. "Chasing moments that aren't yours to take." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of truth. The witness felt a lump form in his throat. He looked down at his boots, kicking at a loose stone on the path. He wanted to make a snarky comment, something like, "It pays the bills," but the words wouldn't come. Saying that would have felt like a lie in the face of Keanu's quiet honesty. He felt a burning sensation in his eyes, a strange stinging that he hadn't felt in a long time. He didn't want to cry, not here, not in front of him. But the walls he had built up were cracking. The dynamic of the confrontation had shifted entirely. The power wasn't with the person holding the camera anymore. The power was with the person who had nothing left to lose. Keanu had already been through the worst fire imaginable. He had survived the death of his child and the end of his relationship. What was a rude photographer to him compared to that? He had no fear. And because he had no fear, he had a freedom that the witness couldn't understand. Keanu looked at the brown paper bag still sitting on the bench. He looked back at the witness. The witness was shivering. It was getting colder as the sun began to dip lower behind the buildings. The witness had been standing there for a long time, waiting in the cold, fueled by adrenaline and bitterness. Now that the adrenaline was gone, the cold was biting through his thin jacket. The witness expected Keanu to leave. He thought the actor would just turn around and walk away, leaving him there in the dust, embarrassed and defeated. That would have been the normal Hollywood ending. The star storms off, the paparazzi feels like a jerk for a minute, and then goes back to work. But Keanu didn't turn his back. He stood there, thinking. The witness saw a flicker of something cross Keanu's face. It wasn't pity. Pity is a cold thing, looking down on someone from above. This was different. This was empathy. It was a recognition of shared humanity. It was the look of a man who understands that everyone is fighting a hard battle. Even the people who seemed like the bad guys, the atmosphere around them felt like it was holding its breath. The city noise seemed to come back in a rush car horns, distant sirens, the chatter of people walking on the other side of the park. But it all felt like background noise to the intense connection happening on that bench. The witness felt trapped, not by Keanu, but by his own realization. He realized that he had come here to hurt Keanu, but in the process he had only hurt himself. He had exposed his own emptiness. "You know," Keanu said, breaking the silence again. He gestured vaguely to the empty space around them. "It's just us here. You don't have to put on a show." "Neither do I." The witness looked up. His vision was slightly blurry. He felt a desperate urge to apologize. He wanted to say, "I'm sorry about your baby. I'm sorry I was such a jerk." But the words felt too heavy, too big for his mouth. He felt unworthy to say them. He felt like he had already done too much damage, so he just stood there, feeling small and foolish. He waited for Keanu to make the next move. He waited for the judgment. But judgment never came. Instead, there was a pause, a long, pregnant pause where time seemed to stretch and bend. The witness saw Keanu's hand move slightly toward the paper bag on the bench. It was a slow movement, deliberate and calm. The witness watched, his heart pounding in his chest, wondering what was happening. He was completely disarmed. He had lost his will to fight, lost his will to capture, lost his will to be cynical. He was just a man standing in the cold, waiting to see what kindness looked like when it was thrown in the face of cruelty. This was the moment of truth. The moment where the witness had to decide who he was going to be when he walked away from this bench. And the catalyst for that decision was about to come from the most unlikely source. Keanu wasn't going to fight him with anger. He was going to fight him with grace. And it was a fight the witness knew he was going to lose. Because grace is a weapon that leaves no scars, only lessons. The air between them cleared, as if the storm clouds of aggression had evaporated. The witness took a deep breath, his shoulders slumping forward. He let go of the defensive posture he had been holding. He let the camera hang loosely against his chest, dead weight. He was ready to listen. He was ready to see what would happen next. And what happened next would be the most shocking reaction of all. The wind rustled the dry leaves around their feet, the only sound in the suddenly heavy quiet of the park. The witness stood there, his shoulders slumped, the camera hanging like a dead weight around his neck. He felt exposed. He had come here to hunt, to capture a moment of weakness, but instead, he had stumbled into a moment of strength that he couldn't understand. He was waiting for the judgment. He was waiting for Keanu to say something angry, to tell him to get lost, to humiliate him the way he had tried to humiliate Keanu, but Keanu didn't do any of that. He looked at the witness for a long moment, his dark eyes soft and understanding. Then, slowly, he reached down to the wooden bench where the brown paper bag sat. The witness flinched instinctively, thinking Keanu might grab his things and leave, or maybe throw something. But Keanu's hand moved gently. He picked up the bag and unfolded the top again. "You're shivering," Keanu said quietly. It wasn't an accusation, just an observation. The witness looked down at his own hands. They were trembling slightly from the cold, yes, but also from the adrenaline crash. "I'm okay," he mumbled, though it was a lie. He wasn't okay. He felt hollow. Keanu reached into the bag and pulled out the other half of his sandwich. It was a simple sandwich wrapped in clear plastic. He held it out toward the witness. The gesture was so small, so domestic, so completely bizarre in this context that the witness's brain couldn't process it at first. He just stared at the outstretched hand. "Take it," Keanu said. "You've been out here a long time. You need to eat." The witness blinked. He looked at the sandwich, then at Keanu, then back at the sandwich. "What? No, I can't. I was taking pictures of you." "I know," Keanu replied. There was no trace of irony in his voice. He didn't say, "You jerk, why were you doing that?" He just stated the fact. "But you're still a person. And people get hungry. Please." He pushed the sandwich a little closer. The witness stood frozen. This was the shock. This was the reaction that no headline could ever capture. The world expected the rich celebrity to treat the poor photographer like trash. That was how the story was supposed to go. But Keanu was rewriting the script in real time. He was looking at a man who had tried to hurt him, and instead of fighting back, he was offering him food. "I don't understand," the witness whispered, his voice cracking. "You don't have to," Keanu said softly. "Just take it. It's good. It's ham and cheese, simple." Slowly, as if moving through water, the witness reached out. His rough hand touched the plastic wrapping. Their fingers brushed for a split second. Keanu's hand was warm. The witness took the sandwich. It felt warm, too. It was a ridiculous, profound moment. He was holding a meal in his hand, given to him by the man he had just tormented. Keanu didn't leave immediately. He sat back down on the bench, leaving some space between them. He didn't look at the witness with suspicion. He just looked out at the park. He took a bite of his own half of the sandwich and chewed slowly. The witness looked down at the food in his hand. For a second he felt like crying. Not because he was sad, but because he was so confused. He had spent years building a wall around himself, telling himself that celebrities weren't real people, that they were targets. But in one simple act of kindness, that wall had been knocked over. He unwrapped the sandwich and took a bite. It tasted like the best thing he had ever eaten. It tasted like humility. They sat there for a few minutes, two strangers on a bench, sharing a meal in silence. The city rushed by around them, unaware of the miracle happening in this small corner. The witness ate quickly at first, then slowed down. The knot in his stomach began to loosen. "I'm having a really hard time," Keanu said suddenly. He wasn't looking at the witness. He was looking at a tree in the distance. "Life has been really hard lately? I'm sure you saw the news." The witness swallowed hard. "I did. I'm sorry." "Thank you," Keanu said. He turned his head and looked at the witness. "And I see you are having a hard time too. Are you okay?" The question hit the witness like a physical blow. Are you okay? The person he was supposed to be exposing was asking about his well-being. The witness realized that Keanu had seen right through him. He had seen the tiredness, the bitterness, the desperation in his soul. He hadn't seen a villain. He had seen a victim of a different kind of cruelty. "I'm just trying to pay my bills," the witness admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "I thought this was the only way." "Maybe it isn't," Keanu said simply. He didn't give a lecture. He didn't tell him to quit his job. He just offered a possibility. There is always another way. A better way. He stood up then, brushing the crumbs from his lap. The witness watched him, half expecting him to say something dramatic, something that would make a great quote for the end of a video. But Keanu didn't want a quote. He just wanted to go home. Keanu looked at the camera hanging around the witness's neck. "Do what you have to do with the photos," he said. "But remember this moment. Remember that you're a human being, not just a camera." "I won't sell them," the witness blurted out. It was the first true thing he had said all day. "I'm deleting them." Keanu smiled. It was a small, sad smile, but it reached his eyes. It transformed his face. He didn't look like a tragic figure anymore. He looked like a man who had found a small piece of peace in a chaotic day. "Thank you," Keanu said. "Take care of yourself." He turned and began to walk away. He didn't look back. He didn't wave. He just walked, his hands in his pockets, his head slightly down, moving with that quiet, familiar gait. He blended into the path, becoming just another person in the park. The witness sat on the bench alone for a long time. He finished the sandwich. He watched the spot where Keanu had disappeared into the trees. The camera sat beside him, silent. He picked it up, turned it on, and scrolled through the images he had taken. He saw the shots of Keanu sitting alone. He saw the zoomed-in photos of his sad face. They were technically perfect. They would have made him a lot of money, but they felt like poison now. He looked at the last photo he had taken, the one where Keanu was looking right at him, asking, "Why are you doing this?" The witness looked at that photo and saw the truth. He saw his own reflection in the lens. He saw the cruelty he was carrying. He pressed the button. Delete, confirm, then the next one. Delete, confirm. He deleted every single image. It felt like washing dirt off his hands. It felt like stepping out of the dark and into the light. The witness stood up. He felt different. The cold didn't bother him as much anymore. The bitterness that had been fueling him for years was gone, replaced by a strange, new feeling. He felt light. He realized that he had come to the park looking for a monster, but he had found a human being. And in finding that human being, he had found the part of himself that he had lost a long time ago. The part that knew right from wrong. The part that knew kindness was stronger than cruelty. As he walked out of the park, he passed a young couple laughing on a bench. He didn't take a picture. He just smiled. It was a small smile, but it was genuine. He walked back into the noisy, chaotic city, but he wasn't part of the noise anymore. He carried a quiet secret with him, a secret about a man who lost everything but still had enough kindness to share a sandwich with an enemy, and that was the real story. Not the cruel decision of fate, but the shocking power of a gentle heart. The witness knew he would never forget this day. It was the day he learned that the strongest reaction to hate isn't more hate. The strongest reaction is love.